Hi, and welcome to lecture number 34. Today the topic is the market revolution and its effects on society and culture. The theme for today is social structures. The learning objective for today is explain how and why innovation and technology, agriculture, and commerce affected various segments of American society over time. The first learning objective deals with migrations during the period of industrialization. It says, large numbers of international migrants moved to industrializing northern cities, while many Americans moved west of the Appalachians, developing thriving new communities along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Most of the international migrants are coming from Northern Europe, beginning in the 1830s and 1840s. More specifically, the vast majority of them are from Ireland and the area in Central Europe now known as Germany. The Irish potato famine destroyed the majority of the food supply of Ireland, and Britain, who was the official governing power of Ireland, did little to send relief. This resulted in a large exodus from the island. About 2 million of the 6 million people in Ireland left in the middle of the century, and of those, about half of them went to the United States. A large influx of Irish immigrants came into the United States, settling mostly in northeastern cities doing factory labor. Irish immigrants came with very little money or possessions, thus they rarely settled beyond their port city of entry within the first generation. This is the source of the large Irish ancestry in eastern cities like Boston. The Irish migrants settled with wage labor in factories that they could find in the urban areas, partly a reason why fewer of them went to southern cities where urban areas were more rare and free labor could not compete against enslaved labor. Also in the 1850s, German migrants fleeing political instability arrive in the United States and settle in the Old Northwest or the states surrounding the Great Lakes. German migrants usually came with more resources and thus were able to move further inland and buy their own plots of land. German migrants engaged in agriculture of food crops and dairy farming. The German influence on cities like Milwaukee, Wisconsin is still noticeable today in their love of beer and bratwurst. Aside from the push factors that are driving immigration, the methods of travel are getting faster with improvements to the steamboat. The large number of migrants created crowded environments in cities that are dirtier and had more crime. These negative aspects fuel a nativist and anti-immigrant sentiment that we'll talk about in a future lecture. The second part of the key concept talked about the migration across the Appalachians and the growth of settlements along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. The American population was doubling every 25 years, and people on the East Coast with means started to look west to spread out and look for their own piece of land. Cheaper land out west is drawing people further and further out, generally settling along the Ohio River Valley to have major transportation route accessible. The map on the top right shows where the mean population center is located in the United States, starting in 1790 all the way to 2010. It shows a constant movement west that follows the Ohio River. New cities in the Great Lakes region become distribution centers for food crops going east and finished goods going west. Since the invention of the steamboat, rivers functioned as highways for goods that went upstream as well as downstream. The cities of Columbus, Detroit, Buffalo, Chicago are cities that really began to grow in population and importance in this historical period. By 1830, a third of the population of the United States lived west of the Alleghenies. The next key concept explains how the market revolution generally led to higher standard of living. The growth of manufacturing drove a significant increase in prosperity and standards of living for some. This led to the emergence of a large middle class and small but wealthy business elite, but also to a large and growing population of laboring poor. The higher standards of living were true for everyone overall, but the rich were usually getting a greater benefit from this increase in standard of living. That means that the gap between the rich and the poor was growing. Social mobility, the ability to increase wealth across generations, was possible, but rare to happen within just one generation. It was unlikely that one person could start at a low economic level and make it to the very top all within one lifetime. However, there were still greater economic opportunities in the United States than there were in Europe. The industrialization process that was happening in the US was dependent on a labor force willing to work for generally low wages, and that was more than could be found in some European countries at the time. Labor unions make some progress and win the right to negotiate collective bargaining agreement contracts in the Supreme Court case Commonwealth versus Hunt. Later on, there is progress in achieving a 10-hour workday through individual state laws. At this time, the norm for factory work is 12 hours a day and 6 days a week. Some factories are averaging close to 72 hours. Northern states respond to petitions of unions and laborers to limit the workday to 10 hours, but improvements on national labor law won't be common until the end of the century. The shift to wage labor is covered in the next key concept. Increasing numbers of Americans, especially women and men working in factories, no longer relied on semi-subsistence agriculture. Instead, they supported themselves producing goods for distant markets. The beginning of a wage economy starts with factories in the Northeast. They became the workplace for small farmers that were priced out by growing commercial farms in the West. Even subsistence farmers saw greater benefits in a time-bound wage labor than the year-round endeavor of maintaining a farm. Commercial farms would also hire workers during planting and harvest seasons, paying them a wage as opposed to paying them with land or seed. This also means the end of homemade products, as they could then buy ready-made products with the wages they earned. The last key concept covers the effects on gender and family roles. It says gender and family roles changed in response to the market revolution, particularly with the growth of definitions of domestic ideals that emphasize the separation of public and private spheres. Like the key concept says, there was a growth in the domestic expectations of women, especially that of married women. However, there were women who worked in factories. The Lowell mill girls are a great example of women working in factories and gaining a greater degree of independence. But that wasn't the case for all women in the United States. The women who were working outside the home were generally single, and then when they married, they would leave that line of work to take care of their home. Factory jobs existed, but by and large, the most common professions for women who worked were teaching and domestic service. Even for those jobs, it was expected that they would retreat into the domestic sphere once they married. Domestic life also goes through a transformation for married women during this period. One development is that families begin to have fewer children. Some textbooks attribute this to the rise of love marriages, but it can also be due to the shift from agriculture to factory work. On a farm, having more kids can be advantageous because they can provide some form of labor, even when they're still young. However, in a wage economy, children become more of a financial burden. The U.S. population continues to grow despite this because of the growing international migration. The development of the cult of domesticity is the growth in the idea that women should be responsible for the home realm, while men are in charge of the financial aspects of the home that normally take place outside of the home. As part of the women's sphere in the cult of domesticity, women were expected to pass on values of morality and piety to their children, and that they be the moral standard for the home. Furthermore, they should be more pure, pious, and submissive. The images on the screen show the early 19th century version of the ideal woman. They were promoted by ladies' magazines like the one pictured. Alright, here's a recap. The market revolution affected migration patterns by attracting international migrants and opening up opportunities of commercial farming in the West. The standard of living increased, though faster for the wealthier classes, creating a larger gap between the rich and the poor. Factory work increased the use of wage labor, and there was a decline in subsistence farming. And finally, more industrial work led to a more domestic role for women. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, you can click on the video link on the screen, and if you're looking for more practice to help you on the AP exam, you can visit apushslides.com. I wish you the very best in all of your studying and look forward to seeing you back on the next lecture.